So I've got an old university friend, Brian, great car guy, where he and I always saw eye to eye on cars to the point where we had the same cars frequently. RX-7, Supra, BMW M cars. Then something very odd happened a couple of years ago. He calls me very excited and says, "I bought a Range Rover Sport." And I'm scratching my head, I'm thinking, I know why people buy Range Rovers, but the Range Rover Sport, I never understood this. Well, they've changed it. So let's take another look at one of these things and try to better understand the Brians of the world. Okay, rather than kicking off this episode describing what this is, let's talk about why I don't understand these things. You see, you look at a Range Rover and people buy them because when you drive them, you feel like you've climbed on the top of Macho Mountain. It looks like a Range Rover. It's about the size of a Range Rover. The interpretation is that of a Range Rover, but it's not quite the genuine article, especially moving into this generation. Previous generations, they looked very different. They looked slimmer. I could understand why people got very excited about them, especially in that god-awful orange color. This one, they've changed the design like they did in the Range Rover we drove, both long wheelbase and the short wheelbase, where it's totally different, but it's exactly the same. The biggest change is in the ass end of the car, where it looks a little bit more cleaned up. I would argue it looks a little too tall for my liking. But from the side profile, especially the daylight opening in the front, it looks very much like the current Range Rover. That's why I'd want a little bit more delta between these two vehicles. Underneath that theme continues, there are 3 different engine choices. Surprise, surprise, the basic one is a 6-cylinder mild hybrid system. Then there's a 6-cylinder plug-in hybrid system. Then there's this. You see, old Brian, he doesn't buy basic cars. He only buys the fastest ones. So he's got like the SVR, like the one with the V8 that was made by Jaguar Land Rover. Now this V8, like the long wheelbase Range Rover we've already driven, has the 4.4 twin turbocharged V8 from BMW. Now with that, I do want to do something a little unusual here and provide some real world feedback from Brian. You see, he has a penchant for picking very unreliable cars over his years. So I kind of laughed when he bought this because you and I both know these things are not known for reliability. And shockingly, he's had it a couple of years and he has commuted in the Metro DC area. And this has proven to be the most reliable car he has ever owned. With that, let's talk more about practicality. This with a BMW V8, you wouldn't think fuel economy is really strong here. And you would be correct. 16, 21, 18 combined. In the hybrid, at least the mild hybrid, it's a little bit better, 18, 26, 21 combined. So over the years, I have developed an unscientific theory. If it says Range Rover all over it, it is usually not lightweight, 5,355 pounds, or depending expressive weights and measures, 2,429 kilograms. Now a couple of points of comparison. That's 350 pounds heavier than if this were a 6-cylinder non-plug-in hybrid. It's 100 pounds heavier than the short wheelbase 6-cylinder mild hybrid Range Rover we've already driven, but it's 300 pounds lighter than the long wheelbase with the same engine Range Rover we've already driven. With that, sport mode. Oh yeah, there's a little bit of delay there, but man, oh man, does that pick up some speed. Now, I will say the transmission does work incredibly well in this application, but huge Hinweis there. I do not know if the programming of the transmission was done by Land Rover or BMW, and I say that because they share the same ZF 8-speed torque converter automatic transmission, but BMW, the way in which they program that same transmission in like an M5, it's incredible. It's like a completely different transmission in the experience. Here you can definitely tell there's some, I guess, speed difference, but then again, this is not trying to be an M5 or an X5M. As an aside, I recently had the guy who runs all of development for BMW M GmbH, and I asked him about it, and he had a very interesting response. That episode will be coming up shortly, and we'll talk more about it. Anyway, putting aside the folks at BMW, the combination of having a BMW engine in a Range Rover Sport with this transmission It's not as if you forget that this is almost 5,400 pounds, but you definitely have a fast vehicle that happens to weigh 5,400 pounds. So in continuing with our theme to understand the Brians of the world, you see, unlike me, he does not have the mentality of a 3-year-old, and he actually procreated 2 lovely daughters, so this is a thing for him. And it's here that we arrive at the first real big difference between this and a standard Range Rover. Whether it's short wheelbase or long wheelbase, there isn't nearly as much packaging space back here. And that's an odd thing, because the wheelbase between this and at least the short wheelbase Range Rover, it's the same. That said, it is pretty flash back here. It even has power recliners in the back, which does accentuate an unusually low hip point, which I don't remember that being the case in a short wheelbase Range Rover. We'd like to see that changed back here. Then a huge hinweis about understanding the Brians of the world. You see, he bought this once he got to the point in life where his daughters no longer think he's cool, so they don't necessarily need to ride in the back of this. So this is like part-time practicality. When he needed more practicality, he had a 3-row something or other. So my guess is most people that buy these are like Brian in that instance with that. Now, at the business end of this being an SUV, a couple of interesting things going on here. Number one, reasonable storage considering what it is. Number two, there's this unique packaging back here where you can bring this shelf up, which is really a partition, not a shelf, so you can put stuff back here and it doesn't turn into like a Turkish bazaar. And then last but not least, this one's fitted with the optional full-size spare tire. 23 inches in this case, and that is hidden underneath this cargo floor here. Now, in order to have a discussion about the way this drives and ride quality, we have to understand dimensions here. Because in my mind, when I think of Range Rover Sport, I think it's slightly smaller. That's not really the case here. You see, the wheelbase of this, that's where you package people and dogs, it's identical to the short wheelbase Range Rover we've already driven. It's the length that changes. That said, this is the first edition. Now, why is that important? Well, the first edition is fitted with the active roll stabilization that transformed the short wheelbase car, meaning the suspension actually pushes the side that has the load on it up to keep it going down the road in one plane of motion. I gotta be honest with you here, this experience is not as good as the active roll stabilization in the short wheelbase Range Rover. Maybe it's the 23-inch wheels that are fitted on this, the first edition. Perhaps we should try this in the plug-in and the regular mild hybrid with smaller wheels. Maybe that's the issue, because as we've learned over many, many years of driving these large trucks with these ridiculous wagon wheels on them, they do disturb the ride quality somewhat. I expected more of a delta in the way these two drive. Yeah, the components are very similar between the two, but if you think about it, this, I gotta believe a different person would want a vehicle like this, so why not make it a little bit more, I guess Germanic would be the way, not as like brutish, hairy chest English, which is really what Jaguar and Land Rover is very good at. However, the folks at Jaguar Land Rover, they pilfered an idea from Mercedes here. So you know how we've driven the S-Class and then the EQS, where they've added these 2 different versions of full-wheel steering. They got a 3-degree, which like most companies do, and then they got a 10-degree, which transforms the way the car works in like low-speed situations like parking lots. Well, the folks at Range Rover were like, that's actually not a bad idea for a vehicle that has this kind of mission. So instead of it being 3 degrees of rear wheel steering, which would help in high speed stability, this has 7.3 degrees of rear wheel steering. Now, why is that important? I've driven this thing in parking lots, and you need to completely recalibrate how quickly this thing can do a U-turn. Like, I tried to get into a parking spot, and this, it didn't go as well as I thought. I almost hit the curb because the thing was so sharp. It's that big of a difference. Like, for example, let's try it here, and there's nobody coming. Please don't try this at home. I'm gonna go and make the U-turn here, and notice, this is a narrow canyon road. No reversing. Granted, I got off-road a little bit, but this is a vehicle that has the wheelbase of a 5 Series, of an E-Class. It's even longer than those, and it's a big, heavy truck. And look at how well it maneuvered. That's the benefit of 7.3 degrees of rear wheel steering. I see other OEMs doing the same thing with their large vehicles. Yes, it is indeed that time again to play your favorite game on the Options Game with today's contestant, a car for the kind of folk that have apparently outgrown their E39 540s with manual transmissions. This, the Range Rover Sport First Edition, for a base price of, holy crap, this thing cost that much? $121,500. Really? How much is the basic one? $83,000 for the lowest horsepower mild hybrid, then $90,000 like the middle model, 395 horsepower, and the plug-in hybrid, even that's a bargain compared to this, $104,200. Thankfully, we do not have to pay for that color Frenza red. And then the interior is light cloud with ebony. Then we get to the Meridian sound system, which I have to say kind of kicks it better for $4,550. Then the full non-leather interior. We will talk more about this later, $1,400. Then the black exterior package, it's all that trim bits in black, $750. The cold climate package, optional on a $120,000 truck. Really? Heated steering wheel, heated washer jets, and heated windscreen, $640. Then remember that full-size spare we talked about, the one even I said was impractical? That's an additional $560. Then the cabin air purification package, $540. Then believe it or not, in a car that cost over 120 grand, they charge you extra for a Wi-Fi data plan, $360. Then the wheels, all four of them in black, that's $350. I don't get it. It's probably the paint on the wheels, not the wheels themselves. Then the non-premium leather steering wheel to match the rest of the non-leather, basically animal-free interior. That is an additional $300. Then it would stand to reason if one is going for a specific theme on the inside of the vehicle, you'd have to change the headliner as well. And there is an option to do that. It looks and feels like suede, but it's cloth. That is an additional $150. Then the only other thing we pay extra for is the destination and handling. And unlike the Defender, this is not made in Slovakia. This is a British car made in England, in the Midlands, although huge invites there. 18% of the parts come from Germany, and only 50% of the parts come from the UK. Either way, $1,475, which brings us to a total retail price of, wow, $132,575. Put another way, that is $2,500 more than that very well-equipped short wheelbase Range Rover we drove a couple of months ago. Remember when we first drove the Defender 110? Some of the details on the inside of that vehicle, like the neoprene on the dash, on the sides of the door panels, and then some of the odd choices in the way they use the plastic. It changed the interior. It was both retro and completely new at the same time. Well, they've extended that here in the quote-unquote animal-free interior. Like the top of the dash and the sides of the seats are that same neoprene that we experienced first in the Defender 110. By looking at this and saying, okay, some people want these animal-free interiors, they decoupled their thinking from let's try to make a knockoff of leather or suede and let's go with other tactile feel. I would argue this choice, it's more important because you'd want something different in tactile feel. Look at the sides of the door panels. It's, I don't know if it is wool, but it presents as wool, which is a fantastic touch and make you almost feel like it's a high-end speaker grill from a home speaker system, not a car. So huge hats off to Amy and the color and trim team at JLR. And just as a side note, remember the last time we were taken by color and trim and tactile feel in a car? It was the Lucid. Take a wild guess where some of their color and trim people came from. Okay, so what have we learned today? Well, I would argue I still don't understand Brian because I don't understand this. Me personally, I would opt for the short wheelbase Range Rover, even the one with the mild hybrid 6, over this at $132,000. Now granted, we should probably put a pin in this discussion until you and I drive both the mild hybrid version of this as well as the plug-in hybrid version of this. I think the math and the equation will change. But even with that, I feel safe in saying this is a generational thing, meaning the move to this generation of Range Rover and Range Rover Sport, specifically by adding the active roll stabilization, transforms the regular Range Rover, which means there is less need for this Range Rover, at least in my mind. And that in turn brings us to the wish list. Normally I'd say let's put a pin in this discussion until we sample all flavors of this generation of Range Rover Sport, but I feel confident in saying this. All of the bits we talked about on the interior, how about we take some of that experimentation in tactile feel and color and trim and blend it with real leather, real suede, so we get something different moving forward and not just for people going for a specific theme. But I am one man, and this is the point of the episode that I turn around to you guys to opine in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV, all one word, MotoManTV, all one word, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And with that, if you got value out of this episode, I would greatly appreciate you sharing them, clicking subscribe and notifications, and hitting the like button. Until I see you in the next episode, bis später.